Hello, we are live, streaming live. This is INI Living Conversations, the 120th session of Conversations of Living in INI. And we are with Sacred Blue Heron Woman, our main sensei of the Owl Freedom Dojo. And she has a very interesting subject to share with you folks today, phenomenology. And I couldn't really give an introduction or write a little text about what's going to be presented here. I understand what phenomenology is. I understand that it's something that philosophers like to study a lot, and it kind of it's a thing that draws the line from, or not draws the line, but it kind of makes us see that there's something beyond just a understandable science, right? There's a lot of phenomenons that we don't understand fully. The world's a lot more complex than this narrative of all understood, very developed, advanced science that we're kind of told by the medias and by schools, and everybody seems to be part of this. Oh, everything's all known, everything's understood by science. But what I understand is that we're barely scratching the surface of what we can understand regarding the phenomenons of life. So that's what I can introduce to this subject. But here's Blue Sacred Heron Woman with you, who is going to speak profoundly and deeply into this subject. So.
Well, good evening. So I want to take a couple seconds to talk about last week's subject, touch on it briefly, with the concept of job being an acronym for just over broke. And we talked about with our Holy Mother the massacre of the dreamers that still goes on constantly. We think that just happened once or twice, but it goes on constantly in our lives. So when I was 6, she spoke to me through the old nurses' uniforms, right? And nursing school stories. And that's when I heard her call to serve her as a nurse. The dream massacre was my dad saying, only if God wants you. Now, I was homeschooled, so if I had been in grade school when I said that, the teacher would have either said, oh yeah, that's good, that'll make you a lot of money, or oh no, that won't make you any money. There's 3 different dream massacres there, right? I didn't care how my dad was trying to massacre the dream. I knew that I was going to be a nurse, and because I never questioned money, just wasn't an issue. I made a really good living as a nurse. Now, my daughter, she said when she was 12, I'm going to be an archaeologist. And people told her, you won't make any money at that. And her answer was, I don't care. She's an archaeologist and she's making a pile of money, right? It's not about it, never. And that's how Holy Mother works within the system, right? Because she knows we need to have money to work the system. So when we follow her guidance, the money flows. If we're forcing it, we will be just over broke all the time. So another person I know had said it at some point in school, I want to be a marine biologist. And she was told, you won't make any money at that. So she abandoned it. And she's been living a life of just over broke since, trying to, not fulfilling her dream because somebody massacred her dream and said, oh, you won't make money at that. But that's all part of the system because they want us making money for them, right? What we talked about last week. So that's where I'm going to end with that. soapbox and go into phenomenology.
Okay.
So it's natural that we turn to the tradition of phenomenology in order to understand the strange difference between the experienced world or worlds of indigenous vernacular cultures and the world of our modern European and North American civilization. So despite all the mechanical artifacts that now surround us, the world in which we find ourselves before we set out to calculate and measure it is not inert. It's not a mechanical object. It is a living field, an open dynamic landscape subject to its own moods and metamorphoses. So our life, your life, my life, and the world's life are deeply intertwined. The world and you, the world and I reciprocate one another. Eine.
Mm-hmm.
The landscape is an ambiguous realm that responds to our emotions and calls forth feelings from us in return. Our spontaneous experience of the world, charged with subjective, emotional, and intuitive content, is the vital and dark ground of all our objectivity. And yet this ground goes largely unnoticed or unacknowledged in our scientific culture. So in a society that accords priority to that which is predictable and places a premium on certainty, our spontaneous preconceptual experience is referred to as merely subjective. The very fluid realm of direct experience has come to be seen as a secondary dimension, a mere consequence of events unfolding in the more real world of quantifiable and measurable scientific facts. It's really a curious inversion of the actual demonstrable state of affairs. Subatomic quanta are now taken to be primordial and real than the world we experience with our unaided senses. The living, feeling, and thinking organism is assumed to derive somehow from the mechanical body whose reflexes and systems have been measured and mapped. The living person is now an epiphenomenon of the atomized corpse. That it takes living subjects complete with their enigmatic emotions and predictable passions to conceive of those subatomic fields, the quanta, or to dissect and anatomize the body is readily overlooked or brushed aside as inconsequential. So the truth is that the ambiguity of our experience is already part of any phenomenon that draws our attention. For whatever we perceive is necessarily entwined with our own subjectivity. And it's already blended with the dynamism of life and sentience, or sensing of it. The living pulse of subjective experience cannot be stripped from the things that we study without the things themselves losing all existence for us. It was his frustration with the mechanistic way of science that led a man named Edmund Husserl to inaugurate the philosophical discipline of phenomenology.
Mm-hmm.
Phenomenology, as he articulated it in the early 1900s, would turn toward the things themselves, toward the world as it is experienced in its felt immediacy. Unlike the mathematics-based sciences, phenomenology would seek to describe the world as closely as possible to the way the world makes itself evident to awareness, the way things first arise in our direct sensorial experience. Our bodies are that mysterious and multifaceted phenomenon that always seems to accompany our awareness, and indeed is the very location of our awareness within the field of appearances. Yet the phenomenal field contains many other bodies, many other forms that move and gesture in a fashion similar to ours. So while we experience our body only from within, the other bodies around us are experienced from outside, and we can vary our distance from these bodies. We can move around them, and this is impossible in relation to our own body. We can't move away from our own body, right? So Husserl discerned that there's an inescapable affinity between the other bodies, the other forms, and our own. The gestures and expression of these other bodies, viewed from the outside, echo and resonate with our bodily movements and gestures that we experience from within. So the phenomenal field is no longer an isolated haunt of a solitary ego. It's a collective landscape constituted by other living subjects as well as by us.
Mhm.
There are, however, many phenomena in the experiential field that are not collective or commonly shared. When daydreaming, for example, your attention is carried by phenomena and whose contours and movements you can alter at will. A whole phantasmagoria of images that lack the solidity of bodies. Such forms offer very little resistance to your gaze because they are entirely yours. They are not held in place by other gazes. And so now we can understand that there are at least two regions of the experiential or phenomenal field. One is the phenomena that unfold entirely for us individually, and another region of phenomena that are evidently responded to and experienced by all the other embodied subjects as well. These phenomena are still subjective because they appear to us within a field of experience colored by our moods and our current concerns. And we cannot alter them or dissipate them at will because they are held in place by many involvements besides ours, by many other beings. So the tree bending in the wind, the cliff wall, the cloud drifting overhead, these are not merely subjective phenomena. They are intersubjective phenomena, phenomena experienced by a multiplicity of sensing objects. The real world that we find ourselves in is not a sheer object. It's not a fixed or finished datum from which all subjects and subjective qualities could be pared away. It is rather an intertwined matrix of sensations and perceptions, a collective field of experience lived from many, many, many different angles. And that's part of the biggest reason why the Mayan calendar has 20 different day signs, right? It's different angles.
Mhm.
The mutual inscription of others in our experience and of us in their experiences affects the interweaving of our individual phenomenal fields into a single ever-shifting fabric, a single phenomenal world or reality, which is not an absolute reality. We think it is, but it's not.
Mhm.
And yet, as we know from our everyday experiences, the phenomenal world is remarkably stable and solid, and we're able to count on it in many ways, and we take for granted much of its structure and character.
Mhm.
This experience solidity is precisely sustained by the continual encounter with others, with other embodied subjects, other centers of experience. The
Mhm.
encounter with other perceivers continually assures us that there is more to anything or to the world than we can perceive at any moment. Besides that side which you see of a tree or a building, you know or intuit that there are other facets of the tree or building that we are all looking at, that we might all be looking at, that are visible to the other perceivers that you cannot see. You sense that the tree is much more than what you directly see of it. You sense it as a presence that already existed before you looked at it. And when you turn away, you know that that tree won't dissipate. So it remains an experience for others, not just for persons, but for other sentient organisms, for the birds that nest in its branches, for the insects that move along its bark, for the sensitive cells and tissue of it quietly drinking sunlight through its leaves. It is this informing of our perceptions by the evident perceptions and sensations of other bodily entities that establishes for us the relative solidity and stability of our life world. The life world is the world of our immediately lived experiences as we live them prior to our thoughts about it. The life world is the world we count on without necessarily paying it much attention. The world of the clouds overhead, the ground underfoot, of getting out of bed to make coffee, turn on the heat or turn on the air conditioner. Right? Easily overlooked, this primordial world is already there when we begin to reflect or philosophize. It is not a private, but a collective dimension, the common field of our lives. The life world is then the world we organically experience in its enigmatic multiplicity and open-endedness, prior to conceptually freezing it into a static space of facts, and prior to conceptualizing in any complete fashion at all. The life world is peripherally present in any thought or activity we undertake. Yet whenever we try to explain this world conceptually, we seem to forget our active participation in it. So in trying to represent the world, we inevitably forfeit its direct presence. The life world is quite different for different cultures. The world that a people experience and come to count on is deeply influenced by the ways they live and engage the world, the life world. So if the worlds experienced by us humans are so diverse, how much more diverse must be the life worlds of all the animals, of the wolves, of the owls, or a community of bees? Despite all this diversity, there are basic structures of the life world that are shared, elements that are common to different cultures and probably even to different species. The life world has various layers, and underneath the layer of the diverse cultural life world, there reposes a deeper, more unitary life world, always already there. Beneath all our cultural acquisitions, a vast and continually overlooked dimension of experience that sustains all our diverse and discontinuous worldviews. And that life world would be Holy Mother.
Mm-hmm.
According to contemporary physics, our Earth is just one celestial body among many others in space. Phenomenologically, all bodies, including humans, are first located relative to the ground of the Earth, and the Earth itself is not in space, since it is Earth that from the first provides the space.
Right.
So Mother, Holy Mother, is the secret depth of our life world. The true task of phenomenology is in the careful demonstration of the manner in which every theoretical and scientific practice grows out of and remains supported by the forgotten ground of our directly felt and lived experience, and has value and meaning only in reference to this primordial and open realm. It is as visible animate bodies that other selves and subjects make themselves evident in our subjective experience, and it is only as a body that we are visible and sensible to others. And on that, I got a dog scratching at the door.
Go ahead.
So let's think about this, though. Right? We're all so eager to leave our bodies, especially with the patriarchal religions calling for heaven, for rapture. Mm-hmm. But without a body, we can't experience anything.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you experience heaven if you don't have a body?
Right.
They don't never, I think people just don't. We all don't.
And to the atheists, there's also something to say to them.
Yeah.
I guess.
So our body is precisely our insertion in the common or intersubjective field of experience. Without our body, without our tongue, without our ears, we could neither speak nor hear another's voice, nor would we have anything to speak about or to reflect on or to think, since without any contact, any encounter, Without any glimmer of sensory experience, there could be nothing to question or to know.
Mm-hmm.
So our living body is therefore the very possibility of contact, not just with others, but with ourselves. The
Mm-hmm.
very possibility of reflection, of thought, of knowledge. So I invite us all to the sensuous and sentient life of our body. Underneath the anatomized and mechanical body that we have learned to conceive, there is the poised animate power that initiates all of our projects and suffers all of our passions. Our living, attentive body is the very being that is listening to this, picking up a pen and scribbling thoughts. So to acknowledge that I am this body is to affirm the uncanniness of our physical form. It is not to lock up awareness within the density of a closed and bounded object for the boundaries of our living bodies are open and indeterminate, more like membranes than barriers. They define a surface of metamorphosis and reciprocity, Aini. Our breathing, sensing bodies draw their sustenance and their very substance from the soils, the plants, and the elements that surround it, continuously contributing itself in turn to the air, to the composting earth, to the nourishment of insects and oak trees and squirrels, ceaselessly spreading out of itself, so that it is very difficult to discern at any moment precisely where our living body begins and where it ends. Considered phenomenologically, as we actually experience it and live it, our body is a creative, shape-shifting entity. Far from restricting our access to things and the world, our body is actually our very means of entering into relationship with all things. Ultimately, to acknowledge the life of our body and to affirm our solidarity with its physical form is to acknowledge our existence as one of Earth's animals, and so to remember and rejuvenate the organic basis of our thoughts and our intelligence. Is the human intellect rooted in and secretly born by our forgotten contact with the multiple non-human shapes that surround us? Our sensing bodies are not programmed machines. They are active and open forms, continually improvising its relation to the things and to the world around it. Our body's actions are never wholly determinate, since they must ceaselessly adjust themselves to a world and the terrain that is itself constantly shifting. If our bodies were truly a set of closed or predetermined mechanisms, then it could never come into genuine contact with anything outside of itself, could never perceive anything new, could never be startled or surprised, because all of its experiences would have been anticipated from the beginning, already programmed, as it were, into the machine.
Mm-hmm.
Consider a spider weaving her web, and the assumption held by many scientists that the behavior of such a diminutive creature is thoroughly programmed in its genes. Certainly, the spider has received a rich genetic inheritance from its parents and its predecessors. Whatever instructions, however, are enfolded within its living genome, they can hardly predict the specifics of the microterrain within which the spider may find itself at any particular moment. They could hardly have determined in advance the exact distances between the cave wall and the branch that the spider is now employing as the anchorage point for her current web, or the exact strength of the rains and the winds that make web spinning difficult. And so the genome could not have explicitly commanded the order of every flexion and extension of her various limbs as she weaves this web into place. However complex are the inherited patterns or programs or predispositions, they must still be adapted to the immediate situation in which the spider finds itself. So however determinate one's genetic inheritance, it must still be woven into the present. An activity that necessarily involves both a receptivity to the specific shape and textures of that present, and a spontaneous creativity in adjusting oneself and one's inheritance to those contours that are all around us. It is this open activity, this dynamic blend of receptivity and creativity, by which every animate organism necessarily orients itself to the world and orients the world around itself. And that is perception.
Mm.
So, to investigate the event of perception as we ourselves experience it and live perception, each thing, each entity that our body sees presents some face or facet of itself to our gaze while withholding other aspects from view. Let's say we take a bowl and look at it.
Mm.
We have to be aware that we can only see one side of its surface and the other side is invisible. So in order to see the other side, we have to pick it up and turn it. And now we can't see the other side again.
Mm-hmm.
While looking at its outer surface, we've only caught a glimpse of the inside. So it reveals aspects of its presence to us only by withholding other aspects of itself for further exploration. So there can be no question of ever totally exhausting the presence of the thing we are looking at, because its very existence of what it is ensures that there are dimensions wholly inaccessible to us. And we don't even ever consider that. We think we know everything. That's why one of the requirements of being part of Owl Dojo family is to not be an expert in anything, because there are dimensions. There are so many dimensions totally inaccessible to us that if we claim to be expert, we can never access anything more than what we've already accessed.
Mm-hmm. And you never stop learning, even if you have a lot of knowledge on or are an expert on something. Even in your own field, there's so much more always to know and to learn.
Yeah, there is. That like I just said, like we just said, there are dimensions of everything that are wholly inaccessible to us. So like us, the object is a temporal being. The bowl that we're holding and observing would be a temporal being, an entity shifting and changing in time, although the rhythm of its changes are probably far slower than ours, because bowl is far more solid than our body is, or my desk that I'm sitting at, or my computer screen, right? My computer. So when our body responds to the mute solicitation of another being, that being responds in turn, whether it's a rock or the computer or the desk. And it discloses to our senses some new aspect or dimension that in turn invites further exploration. So by this process, our sensing body gradually attunes itself to the style of this other presence, to the way of the stone or the tree or the bowl on a table, as the other adjusts itself to our style and sensitivity. So perception is precisely this reciprocity, this aini, the ongoing interchange between our body and the entities that surround our bodies. Mm-hmm. When we quiet the persistent chatter of words in our head, in our minds, we will find this silent or wordless dance always going on, an improvised duet between our animal body and the fluid breathing landscape that it inhabits. Where does perception originate? Well, it's an attunement or synchronization between our own rhythms and the rhythms of things themselves. The sensible gives back to us what we lend it, and that is only what we received from it in the first place. Our most immediate experience of things is necessarily an experience of reciprocal aini, encounter of tension, communication, and commingling. From within the depths of the encounter, we know the thing or phenomenon as our interlocutor, as a dynamic presence that confronts us and draws us into relation. Right? To define another being as inert or a passive object is to not deny its ability to engage us and to provoke our senses. So we block then our perceptual I-need reciprocity with that being. To our sensing body, no thing presents itself as utterly passive or inert. Even though we may think it is, it's not. So only by affirming the animateness of perceived things do we allow our words to emerge directly from the depths of our ongoing reciprocity, I-need, with the world. If we wish to choose a single term to characterize the event of perception as it is disclosed by phenomenological attention, we could choose the word participation. To participate in one another's existence, influencing each other, and being influenced in turn is perception. Perception always involves at its most intimate level the experience of active interplay or coupling between the perceiving body and that which it perceives. Prior to all verbal reflections, at the level of our spontaneous sensorial engagement with the world around us, we are all animists. Our perceiving body does not calculate logical probabilities. It simply gregariously participates in the activity of the world, lending its imagination to things in order to see them more fully.
Very powerful.
From the magician or phenomenologist's perspective, that which we call imagination is an attribute of the senses themselves. Imagination is not a separate mental faculty. It is the way the senses themselves have of throwing themselves beyond what is immediately given in order to make tentative contact with the other sides of the things that we cannot sense directly, with the hidden or invisible aspects of the sensible. In truth, since the act of perception is always open-ended and unfinished, we are never wholly locked into any particular instance of participation. We always retain the ability to alter or suspend any particular instance of participation. Yet, we cannot ever suspend the flux of participation itself. As we reacquaint ourselves with our breathing bodies, then the perceived world itself begins to shift and transform. And when we consciously frequent the wordless dimension of our sensory participations, certain phenomena that have habitually commanded our focus begin to lose their distinctive fascination and slip toward the background, while hitherto unnoticed or overlooked presences begin to stand forth from the periphery and engage our awareness. The countless human artifacts with which we are so commonly involved, the asphalt road, our chain link fences, our telephone wires, buildings, light bulbs, ballpoint pens, automobiles, street signs, computers, plastic containers, newspapers, radios, television screens, smartphones, all begin to exhibit a common style, and so they lose some of their distinctiveness. Meanwhile, organic entities like crows, hawks, squirrels, the trees, the wild weeds that surround our house, humming insects, stream beds, clouds, and rainfalls all exude a new vitality, each coaxing our breathing body into a unique dance. In contact with the native forms of earth, our senses are slowly energized and awakened, combining and recombining in ever-shifting patterns. All these other shapes and species have co-evolved like ourselves with the rest of the shifting world, the shifting earth. Their rhythms and forms are composed of layers upon layers of earlier rhythms, and in engaging them, our senses are led into an inexhaustible depth that echoes that of our own flesh. The patterns on the stream surface as it ripples over the rocks, or on the bark of an elm tree, or in the cluster of weeds, are all composed of repetitive figures that never exactly repeat themselves, to which our senses may attune themselves, even while the gradual drift and metamorphosis of those shapes draws our awareness in unexpected and unpredictable directions. In contrast, the mass-produced artifacts of civilization, from milk cartons to washing machines to computers, draw our senses into a dance that endlessly reiterates itself without variation. To our sensing bodies, these artifacts are, like all phenomena, animate and even alive, but their life is profoundly constrained by the specific functions for which they were built. And once our bodies master these functions, the machine-made objects teach our senses nothing further. They are unable to surprise us, and so we must continually acquire new built objects, new technologies, the latest model of this or that, if we wish to stimulate ourselves. Of course, our machine-made artifacts inevitably retain an element of more than human otherness. This unknowability, this otherness, resides most often in the materials from which the object is made. The tree trunk, that is the telephone pole, the clay of the bricks from which the building is fashioned, the smooth metal alloy of the car door as we lean against it, or now fiberglass, whatever they're made of. All these still carry, like our bodies, the textures and rhythms of a pattern that we ourselves did not devise, and their quiet dynamism responds directly to our senses. Too often, however, this dynamism is stifled within mass-produced structures that are closed off from the rest of the earth, imprisoned within technologies that plunder the living land. The super straight lines and right angles of our office architectures, for instance, make our animal senses wither, even as they support the abstract intellect. The wild, earthborn nature of the materials, the woods, the clays, the metals, and the stones that went into the building are readily forgotten behind the abstract and calculable form. So it is that much of our built environment and so many of the artifacts that populate it seem sadly superfluous and dull when we identify with our bodies and taste the world with our animal senses. And this is not to say that those artifacts are innocuous. Many of them are exceedingly loud, even blaring. For what they lack in variation and nuance, they must make up in clamorous insistence to monopolize the perceptual field. Whenever we choose to assume the position and poise of the human animal that we are, then the entire material world itself seems to come awake and to speak, and organic earthborn entities speak far more eloquently than the machine-made, human-made artifacts. So as we return to our senses, we gradually discover that our sensory perceptions are simply our part of a vast interpenetrating webwork of perceptions and sensations born by countless other bodies, supported, that is, not just by ourselves, but by icy streams tumbling down granite slopes, by owl wings and lichens, and by the unseen imperturbable wind. This intertwined webwork of experience is, of course, the life world that is a profoundly carnal field. It is the biosphere as it is experienced and lived from within by the intelligent body, by the attentive human animal who is entirely part of the world that we experience. So matter as flesh. In investigating a new way of expressing this consanguinity of the human animal and the world we inhabit, we might shift from the body into the collective flesh, the flesh of the world. By shifting into collective flesh, we might find an elemental power, a mysterious tissue or matrix that underlies and gives rise to both the perceiver, us, and the perceived, as interdependent aspects of its own spontaneous activity. The singing of the grandmothers, right? The holy ones, the old ones. It is the reciprocal Eine presence of the sentient in the sensible and of the sensible in the sentient, a mystery of which we have always been aware, but don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
To demonstrate this notion of matter as flesh is the fact that our hand is able to touch things only because our hand is itself touchable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I don't think the majority of us ever think about something like that.
Yeah.
Our hand can touch only because it's self-touchable. And so it is entirely part of the tactile world that it explores. Similarly, our eyes, with which we see things, are themselves able to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
With their gleaming convex surfaces, their colors, and their hues, they are included within the visible field that they see. They are themselves part of the visible, like the bark of a cedar or a piece of sandstone or the blue sky. To touch the coarse skin or flesh of a tree is at the same time to experience our own tactility, to feel ourselves touched by the tree. And to see the world is also at the same time to experience ourselves as visible, to feel ourselves seen.
Mm-hmm.
We can experience things, can hear, touch, and taste things only because as bodies we are included in the sensible field and have our own texture, sounds, and tastes. We can perceive things at all only because we ourselves are entirely part of the sensible world that we perceive. So we might as well say that we are organs of this world and the world is perceiving itself through us. Anthropology studies done of the ecology of the Koyukon Indians of north central Alaska reveal that the traditional Koyukon people live in a world that watches. A forest of eyes. A person moving through nature, however wild and remote, even desolate the place may be, is never truly alone. To them, the surroundings are aware, sensate, and personified, and they must at every moment be treated with the proper respect. Such a mode of experience, which seems so strange and confused to our civilized ways of thinking, becomes understandable as soon as we acknowledge that underneath our conventional assumptions, the reciprocal Eine nature of direct perception, that the fact that to touch is to feel touched and that to see is to feel oneself seen, is always there. The practice of language among indigenous peoples carries a different significance than it does in our modern world. Enacted primarily in song, prayer, and story among oral people, language functions not simply to dialogue with other humans, but also to converse with the more than human cosmos, to renew reciprocity, Eine, with the surrounding powers of earth and sky, to invoke kinship with those entities to which our civilized mind, they're utterly insentient and inert. Among the Omaha Nation, a rock may be addressed with the respect and reverence that one pays to an ancient elder. So here's a way they address a rock. Unmoved from time, without end you rest, there in the middle of the paths, in the midst of the winds you rest, covered with the droppings of birds, grass growing from your feet, your head decked with the down of birds you rest, in the midst of the winds you wait, aged one. Thank you. So in this way, words do not speak about the world, rather they speak to the world and to the expressive presences that with us inhabit the world. And that is phenomenology.
Wow, what a profound and extensive study, or I don't know what to call it, narration, explanation,
Investigation.
investigation of this. And I don't know, maybe it's not natural in everyone this is one of the things, right, where not everyone is interested in knowing what they're seeing and understanding. Some people just are just happy with plain simple stuff and superficial existence. And I just can never wrap my head around that and understand why, because I've never been like that. I've always been, since very little, I was always thinking about space and time and the universe, and why is this, and why are we here, and what is this, and why were there dinosaurs. And I was always trying to understand, and always, and to this day I'm always trying to, and that I understand now is what has approached me to this path. That's why we're here. I mean, it's an important piece of this, of being here. And I guess anyone that wants to be part of Aloha Nidao Living is there because they have this curiosity, right, about the world.
Right.
And they've also advanced so much in that curiosity. They advanced enough to know that there's something wrong with the world, and that there's very few options to do something that is not supporting the same thing, supporting the same fake, dominant, tyrannical system, right? And not be enslaved and not be robbed by it. And so that's when you start looking, what else is out there, and then you might come here. But then if you don't have that curiosity, there's not much to do, right?
But I think everybody has that curiosity. I think it just gets killed because that's the dream, right? There's a line I heard, read, La vida sin sueños,
Sin sueños, sí.
humans without a dream.
Right. And
Because we massacre, I mean, when my daughter comes home and talks about interactions with her friends, I can point out now every single time that they've killed a dream of hers or she kills theirs. Right?
mm-hmm.
It's just so ingrained in us now. This dream, this massacre of the dreamers. The blood no longer has to run in the streets. We just do it.
Right.
Every other breath.
And it's almost like growing up. That's what we're told. Being mature and grown up is forgetting about your dreams.
Yeah, killing dreams. Yep.
Yeah, and and just accepting reality. That's so then it's funny that we are easily judged as just immature dreamers that don't understand reality, or that don't, but it's the other way around. Everything's upside down.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
it's you that don't understand that you can't, you still don't allow yourself to perceive the reality, which is we are being robbed and tyrannized and enslaved and tortured by a group of psychopaths, and it's kind of hard to wake up to that reality and see how far that has come, right?
Yeah.
How far
Yeah, exactly.
that has come, and then it's just so different from what, I mean, seeing that and being congruent with that, with seeing that, requires so much detachment from the established society and from what seems normal and what seems
Well,
real.
it takes a getting out of the box because we're put in boxes from the day we're born, right? Where it's actually considered that the womb is a box. So we go from the box of the womb to the box of the neonate bassinet in the nursery that is in a box, a room, to the box of the crib at home that's in a box, to the box of the car, to the box of the schoolroom, to the box of the job, to the box of, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Totally. But now I think that I get the inspiration really, like just right now, that because I've thought myself about phenomenology. I've read a little bit about philosophy and how some philosophers try to describe uh, phenomenons differently, and now I come to realize that I myself have been observing, trying to understand the phenomenology of a virtual reality. The phenomenology, this phenomenon that we of this perception that people have, that a lot of people have, most people have. That is, but it's so well constructed. It has been like added on to, constructed for so long, so many centuries, so many different pieces that make up the construct of, for example, believing that a virus is a cause for some of disease,
Right.
and things like that. And and you try to tear that apart, and and you see that it's not a like one lie. It's a huge castle of lies and constructs, and that
Yeah.
has and we've been part of that for so long. So
For
that's
millennia.
like a phenomenon, right? Wow,
Yeah.
that's the phenomenon, because it's still a virtual reality. It's a castle built on not the truth, right? So
Right.
there's no foundation. It's just fake. It's
It's
false.
all it's
It's
all a fake
virtual.
house of cards. Yeah.
I mean, but
Right.
then it has this power of bringing everyone's perception. And I'm just putting pieces of with what you said here. I mean, because I learned something today. Um, how our perception, how powerful the perception is, so that since we perceive that as being real, we make it real, and we actually get sick, and we actually like
Yeah.
manifest
Yeah.
that reality. And that to me is it's a phenomenon that needs a lot of describing, a lot of understanding about. And I think that we're doing part of that job as well.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, I want to say we are focused on the phenomenon of the reality of nature of and that's what we're trying to approach, right? What we're trying to get to. I mean, you and me, we share that. Because I've seen, these young people, these young guys that are into the freedom movements, and they understand the new tyrannical measures, and they understand that they must seek sovereignty. But I see in them a lot of being still kind of entertained by the status quo. They're kind of like having fun still, right?
Yeah.
They don't really crave going back into nature. They don't have that craving of. I myself have that craving. I mean, I can use the computers. I'm good at it, but it's not like, oh, that's what I want to see myself doing in 10 years. No, I want to see myself speaking to the macaws in 10 years. That's my that's my
Right.
dream,
Well,
right?
because it's remember the messages I left for you this morning. This underlying this American dream, the American dream is getting back to nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but we think that going out for a weekend with our noisy ass boat on the lake and dumping lots of fuel oil into the water is back to nature.
Mm-hmm.
Or that going camping on a campground where it's just like an apartment building because your neighbor is a stone's throw away from you is back to nature.
Mm-hmm.
And again, nature is an inanimate object, but
It's something you
we've been
visit.
programmed that way by the patriarchy, by the patriarchal system for millennia.
Right. So it's really hard to I guess to understand freedom, we really need to work on the mental structures and
Well,
our
and
perception, and to free our perception as well, and then free our dreams,
the fixation on wanting a financial life, right? But free our dreams, we can't free our dreams if we don't. The vast majority of us are la vida sin sueños, humans without dreams.
Right.
We think we're dreaming, but we're not.
Wow. So that's hard to say and hard to hear, but that's love. Love
I
is.
and at some point in my nursing career, I absolutely loved my nursing career, but I do know that at some point in my career, the thought came, what is this all about? What is this life? We're supposed to work, 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 and then retire and then die, and there's nothing more than work, 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 and always what, right? So but once again, I got kicked out of the army for being too disruptive. So I guess I've been disruptive since I was a little girl. Since I came out of the womb, I was disruptive.
So we have to be
and it never
disruptive.
stopped, right?
So
there was a part of me that never allowed, I would just go inside and be pissed and disruptive, right? I would put on the facade to be not disruptive, but inside I was still the little tyrant, the little rebel going, fuck you. I didn't know the word, but for some people that spark was killed, right? With they're armored, they're fully armored, they've totally subverted that spark, so they're not hearing Holy Mother say, there's got to be something more than this life. There's got to be.
Right. So what does this bring us to for next week?
We're going to delve back. We're going to go back into the subject of Holy Mother. I had the perfect title this morning, and it's totally slipped my mind.
Okay. Well, if you want, you can tell me later.
Yeah, it's still going to be about maybe the way of Holy Mother or something like that. It'll come again.
Okay. So that's for already the 17th of January. It's going to be the 121st conversation. Wow. If anybody here wishes to follow their dreams, to join, to do something about something.
First of all, figure out what a dream is.
Yeah.
That's the first step.
Let me say this. What if there's something even, if you could even dream something greater, right? What if there's a greater thing, right, than what you've thought before? Wouldn't you take that?
Yeah.
You surely would. So, yeah. So our invitation is to that greater dream, to that greatest dream.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean not dreaming. That doesn't mean letting go of. I mean, there's a sacrifice, but the reward is so much greater.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alrighty. So, anything else you want to share? Shall we close?
That's it. Yep.
Alrighty. So, thank you for being here, and thank you for watching. I know there's people watching live. There we had like 8 down to 4 now.
Oh wow!
In Rumble, and I guess that's our main platform.
Yeah.
Because we're not being chosen by the algorithm of censorship. We're not being shadow banned.
Yeah.
And plus, you've done a little bit of work trying to make that channel known. So thank you everyone for being there. This will be recorded, and please comment and please interact with us as much as you can. And we'll see you next week.